from this moment on. Obviously, well, we know quite a bit about Obama, but we want to know about Romney. What we know about Romney in terms of his character, now you should be starting to look at also, you know, James David Love. That book will predict his performance as president. Okay? Now, if you've done enough of that on GW, you may not have gotten stuck with him. But we did it in this class. Okay? We have a few more people alive among our military. Everyone that have been in Iraq. And we would be much richer. Much, much richer. Billions of dollars richer. So, in Hitler's case, people didn't take Hitler seriously. Well, there are a lot of nice people in the except that Isa, as he calls himself, is a Republican congressman from there. And Mr. Romney, along with so many great Republican and some Democratic leaders, George W. Bush, Cheney, and so on, all escaped the draft. Finally, when we invaded Iraq, to liberate and establish, according to George W. himself, with serious intellectual and mental problems, as you're going to see. Some people want him to destroy Saddam, but he didn't, because he thought that if he went into Iraq, that the United States would be in a very bad situation, because Iraq, he knew quite a bit about Iraq, unlike his son. So that's why he never supported his son's adventure of March 2003, going to Iraq to overthrow Saddam. When the American administration came out with and declared that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, which he didn't, of course, and then used that as an excuse to attack him. And now, that's the story I think we've talked about. When Sandy came along and sand clogged and water clogged all of the east coast of the United States, whereby even those guys who don't believe in climate change, they're saying, now, wait a minute. But again, a lot of the climate change, I mean, people who don't believe in climate change, they don't care if Manhattan goes to underwater. It's that bad. But these people, this brain trust, constantly sent him ideas that he used during his campaign against Hoover, who had no ideas. And Hoover simply said, we cannot fool around with the economy. We have to leave the economy alone. No government intervention. Right? No government intervention. You got to leave it alone. No taxes, nothing. Because in time, the system will correct itself. Sure. You don't want the fellow who's lazy enough not to want to read what's happening around the world every morning. Or being a guy from Hollywood, want to see it on television briefly, you know, put it in video form instead of reading, or it's not ready. When I was working in Washington, it was well known that that's how President Reagan wanted a few things from the CIA put on, you know, video so that he reads it there and doesn't read it that way. And quit about 5 o'clock, you know, for a drink and dinner. So we're talking about the passive positive or passive negatives. GW, same way. If you're not a hard worker, presidency is not your place. But then, after that famous August 9 intelligence briefing that warned him and his national security advisor, Conley Rice of Stanford, and so many other people, they didn't pay any attention to it. And then came 9/11. Almost 3 weeks, the attack. All of a sudden, the president, despite the fact that he made a mistake, he didn't have a mandate election, all of a sudden, he became very powerful. He assumed power. And he used it badly because of his character and his staffing. They lied to the American people on Iraq and so many other things. Had they not, all those people who died in Iraq and Afghanistan would be alive today.
Whenever I get into conversations with the moron right, which is quite often at coffee clutches in Orange County. So all my right-wing creepos from Orange County have to either say, you're lying or he's, and then,
Orrin Hatch was re-elected.
Yes, at 80 years old.
Yeah, and running against a right of Hitler guy. I don't remember his name. Poor Orrin Hatch. George W. Remember his secret formula, which he didn't call secret formula, but Saddam had all that atomic stuff. So you see, that's why we had to bring him down. Pure lies. But the American people, we liked him anyway. We're nice to people. Once they're, poor Carter. Poor Carter was in only once. He's still going around doing good things, by the way, Carter. Then Carter, very respectable. Georgia, submariner, submarine commander, goes around the world, tries to do peace. Feed the poor. It doesn't get much press, does it? Tells you something about our newspapers. And then Reagan, they classified passive policy, or a slight passive negative, on the borderland. Reagan was not a hard worker. That's why all kinds of people tend to. The next guy who comes in, Arab-Israeli peace. What's that? We're talking about GW. Now coming back to our good president, GW. GW is away. He did not attend the Republican convention, and they didn't want him there because the Republicans didn't want the American people. We have short memories, remember? We are television people. Sports, yeah. They didn't want the American people to remember that it was during GW's time where we had to fight 2 wars, and that at least which had not been finished, and we had a depression, and so on and so forth. That the debt had gone beyond all limits, and that GW was a Republican. They didn't want America to remember that, and therefore he was not welcome anywhere, the poor guy. And brilliant people like Vice President Cheney, discovered graduate school. So he stayed in graduate school until the war finished. Young Bush, on the other hand, was admitted to the Texas National Guard. Nobody else was, but he was somehow. And then he went AWOL. In the National Guard, you're supposed to show up, you know, like in normal circumstance, at least in those days, once a month, go to the armory, do a few exercises and so on and so forth, shoot a few things, and that's it. But he wasn't even there. He was getting drunk and so on. All right. Okay, he was all over the place. Why did he go to war in Iraq? Totally lied on the American people. The disgusting media in this country, including all these cute, high-paid journalists. And we knew, everybody knew, that his efforts to have a nuclear device had been pushed aside way, 10, 12 years before. He didn't have anything nuclear. The Russians knew it, we knew it, but the lie overcame the truth. Even a distinguished soldier like Secretary of State Colin Powell lied at the United Nations. Condi Rice, there's nothing to say about Condi. Okay, in terms of incompetence as well as pure lying. You have to use that term, people. You have to use, don't use the term mislead. The reason I was getting mad, and I can confess now to you, with Romney was because he was insulting my intelligence. We have to respect ourselves, people. Now the oil companies wanted the United States to take Iraq and establish a pro-American dictatorship there, because that's the only way you're going to run Iraq. Talking about democracy as you go into Iraq as an excuse, you must be stupid or lying. That's the Bush administration. The point here is that the excuse that the administration gave to establish a democracy by killing the dictator was just public, especially when the dictator was given also the other excuse, nuclear weapons or nuclear material. So therefore the oil companies, they want to take Iraq, and number two, the so-called neoconservatives. Neoconservatives wanted to take Iraq and establish a huge base there to project power, 1,000-mile sort of diameter, a circle, which would secure Israel, would secure all American interests, and even provide a threat toward Russia, China, and control over the whole, much of the Muslim world. And anybody who talks about terrorism is begotten by drones or anything else, whether it's North Africa or the Middle East or Central Asia or South Asia, including Afghanistan. So that was the geopolitical excuse. And then there were the right-wing evangelical community, even particularly the Messianic types from there. These are the people who get happy on television every time there's a conflict in the Middle East. Right now they're getting happy again. You know why? They think that the book of Revelation tells them that the Messiah should be the Christian Messiah we're talking about, not the Mahdi in the Muslim tradition and not the Messiah in the Jewish tradition. The Christian Messiah, Jesus, is going to come. They're waiting to come. All we need is a war in the Middle East involving Israel and the Arabs. Okay? In fact, they've got television sets now. Looking at the Mount of Olives and so on television, you can see it. Bush felt marginalized in his family, and he wanted to prove himself the brother Jeb was much smarter and more humane. We try to explain why this kind of personality wants to invade Iraq. And why he was so lazy for the first several months that he came into the presidency. Until 9/11. Wake up, but the massive intelligence that was available to him, he didn't read. So if you're lazy, if you're a passive guy, this is not the job for you. And when you have a passive president, a passive executive, the assistants move in. We've made that point so many times. And grab power. Non-elected people, people who we don't even know. Karl Rove with George W. And then, hold on, take a note, I'll get back to you. I'm trying to review these things. I don't want to go further, but obviously this guy got us into two wars. And the reason is why? Well, to prove himself to his family, to prove himself to his father, plus you're lazy, interest groups walk in, they become members of the cabinet, especially when you delegate it to the ultimate interest group representative by the name of the guy from Wyoming. What was his name? Cheney, as vice president. They gave him, okay, the role of populating the administration. So the interest groups move in to the White House as they did with Cheney's leadership. Man led the escape service twice, the draft, by the way, as vice president. Isn't that incredible? So, and you know, among them were oil company representatives, definitely want Iraq oil, right? Representatives of what? Who else? Military industrial complex. Good. Representatives of people who wanted to establish a powerful American base to secure that whole area, including the so-called neoconservatives, as they're called, who thought that they were making the Middle East perpetually secure for Israel. And then, who else? The evangelical community, who want what? A war in the Middle East between the Arabs and the Israelis as the prelude to the book of Revolution in the Bible and the coming of the Christian Messiah. Okay? Preconditions to them. There's going to be an election in Israel, by the way, because Netanyahu wants to come back even more powerful. God help the globe and Israel and the neighbors. Hamas is the radicalized wing of the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt, MB, Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt, in the Gaza Strip. And guess who was among the people that helped its radicalization? Israel. Not only by not creating a Palestinian state, but by encouraging extremist Muslim Brotherhood shares. At the end of that book, a very important section, it talks about Narcissists in the West, and specifically in the United States. And guess who are the two narcissists that briefly are talked about? Who knows? He's gotten that far, yes. I've been suspecting about this guy. Yes. Who? Bush Jr. Yeah, don't get the father involved in this guy. Okay, Bush Jr. and And Palin. You remember Palin? She ran as, Alaska lady, into hunting and that kind of stuff. And you remember the son and the daughter got pregnant. You remember the whole thing. Very, very interesting. So Palin, she puts in the same category because she didn't deal with women throughout that book because, So, because under Sharia law, traditionally Muslims recognize three religions: themselves, Islam, and the two religions that they came out of, that preceded them, Judaism and Christianity. So therefore Christians and Jews have certain rights, not equality, but they have certain rights. Christian Europe did not give that kind of, the great kings of Christian Europe that persecuted Jews. They didn't give them that kind of benefit. At least Islam did.